Hi everyone. Welcome to the March edition of the PED Lunch and Learn, featuring a presentation of the Municipal Comprehensive Review of the city's official plans. Our presenters are Delia McPhail, Planner Sustainable Communities, Lauren Vraets, Planner Sustainable Communities, and Alana Fulford, Planner Zoning and Committee of Adjustment. Today we're going to do something a little bit different and break the presentation into two parts with Q&A after each. So if you could please get your questions in as soon as they come to you, post them in the chat. At about the 15-minute mark, we're going to do some questions on the first section of the presentation, and then at 12:25 we'll get started on the second session. And again, we'll have questions at the end as well. So get your questions in and let's get right to it. Delia, Lauren, Alana.
Thank you. The focus of today's discussions will be on the proposed updates to the Urban Hamilton Official Plan to ensure its conformity with the provincial land use planning policies, as well as proposed policy and zoning bylaw changes to address Council's direction for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario. To start, I'd like to say the land acknowledgement. The City of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. The land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Ashinabek to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The City of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, North America, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. We would like to welcome you to this Lunch and Learn, which will begin with an overview of the Grids 2 Municipal Comprehensive Review, followed by highlights of the proposed official plan changes on a topic area basis. Once we've covered all of the topic areas, we will identify the next steps in this project. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Lauren, who will provide a brief overview of why the city is reviewing its official plans, how we got to this point, and where we will go from here.
Thanks, Delia. So municipalities review their official plans on a regular basis to ensure that they remain up to date, reflect current provincial policy, and represent the long-term vision of the municipality. Official plan amendments that implement the Municipal Comprehensive Review are require approval from the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. In November 2021, through Grids 2 and the MCR, Council approved a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario to accommodate all forecasted population and employment growth within the existing urban boundary to the year 2051. The proposed amendments implement the no urban boundary expansion growth scenario by removing current policies and mapping that would allow for a future urban boundary expansion and to plan for and manage growth within the existing urban boundary. Changes to the city's existing low-density residential zones in the former communities are also proposed, and these changes will be highlighted later in the presentation. So staff has broken down the review of the city's official plan review into 4 phases. Now we're currently in phase 1, and phase 1 involves the review of the Urban Hamilton official plan to bring it into conformity with the provincial land use planning policies. It also includes changes to the urban and rural official plans necessary to implement the council direction for a no urban boundary growth scenario. Phase 2 will involve the review of the rural Hamilton official plan to bring it into conformity with the provincial policy framework, and it will also include refinements to the agricultural and natural heritage system mapping. Phase 3 will be a review of the urban and rural Hamilton official plans, dealing with local matters and other items that are listed on the slide. And the 4th and final phase will include the delineation of major transit station areas and associated density targets along the B line, and the possibility of inclusionary zoning policies to further support the development of affordable housing. Because the provincial land use policy framework touches on a wide range of matters, the city has approached the review of the official plans on a topic area basis. So we would now like to take you through some of the notable updates to the official plans based on the topic areas shown on this slide. For the purpose of this presentation, we've grouped similar topics together, and I'll now pass it over to Delia, who will introduce the first set of topic areas.
Okay, Thank you, Lauren. So let's begin by highlighting the proposed updates within the provincial plans, housing, employment, transportation, and cultural heritage topic areas. In 2015, the province of Ontario began what is known as the coordinated review of its provincial planning policy documents. Following this review, in 2017, the province updated the Greenbelt Plan, the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and the Growth Plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Since that time, the Growth Plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe was further updated in 2019 and again in 2020. The current provincial policy statement was released in 2020. Updates to the Urban Hamilton Official Plan include policy references and mapping corrections to reflect the updated provincial plans. For example, there are some lands within Lower Stony Creek that were removed from the Greenbelt Plan through the coordinated review. Other mapping updates to implement Greenbelt Plan mapping changes will occur through Phase 2 of the Official Plan Review through Rural Hamilton Official Plan conformity updates. Finally, there are a series of glossary updates to reflect new and revised provincial definitions. New definitions include such terms as impacts of a changing climate, green infrastructure, low-impact development, and complete streets, among others. While some definitions were updated to provide further clarification, such as adding motorized mobility devices to the term active transportation.
Policy updates to the Urban Hamilton Official Plan that fall under the housing topic area include updates that reflect the following. Alignment with the city's housing and homelessness action plan, such as updated housing targets for new ownership and rental units, including market rate units and affordable units for moderate and low-income households. Changes to the targeted number of housing units reflect the forecasted increases in both new ownership housing and new rental housing units anticipated annually. The percentage of market rate ownership housing is targeted at 40% of supply, and affordable to low and moderate income households is targeted at 60%. The target for percentage of new annual rental unit supply remains unchanged from current policy at 40% market rate, 20% affordable to moderate income households, and 40% affordable to low income households. Other updates include planning for a mix of housing forms, types, and densities to meet market-based and affordable housing needs of current and future residents, as well as encouraging the creation of family-sized dwelling units, those with a higher number of bedrooms and multiple dwellings. A policy has been added to address the PPS policy requiring the city to maintain the ability to accommodate residential growth for a minimum of 15 years through residential intensification and redevelopment within the city's urban area. And where new development is to occur, there should be zoning in place to facilitate residential intensification to meet a 3-year supply of available residential units. Residential intensification development criteria provided in Chapter B of the Urban Hamilton Official Plan is also proposed to be expanded to include evaluation criteria related to development being transit supportive, the inclusion of sustainable design elements such as green infrastructure, and retention or enhancement of natural attributes, including native vegetation and trees, support and facilitation of planned active transportation modes, and the availability and location of existing or proposed public community facilities and services. Given Council's decision for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario and the need to accommodate all projected population growth within the urban area, additional policy updates to facilitate residential intensification throughout the urban area will be included in discussion of the urban structure topic area.
I also don't understand, like, okay, so let's say they clear out all the tours and merchandise.
Can we
You're still dealing with the
mute it?
meeting
Can we mute
rooms that
everybody?
have to rent, unless they've taken that over. And the space is not big enough, and nobody will come there because there's.
The next topic area is employment. The Growth Plan has introduced a new term, provincially significant employment zones. Many of the city's existing employment areas are classified as provincially significant employment zones. The policy updates therefore identify and map these areas while recognizing that all employment areas contribute to the local economy. New policies encourage the efficient use and intensification of existing employment areas to increase employment densities and connections with active transportation. The Growth Plan has also required the city to establish minimum employment density targets broken down by employment designation. The city's employment density targets will plan to achieve an overall density of 29 jobs per hectare to the year 2051. The proposed draft official plan amendment includes mapping and policy changes to implement the employment land conversions previously approved by Council in August 2021, as the conversion of employment land to non-employment designations may only be converted through a municipal comprehensive review. With the new draft that's coming this spring, additional lands may be recommended for conversion, include those that were deferred by Council back in August. Finally, the provincial policy statement has introduced new land use compatibility requirements between employment and sensitive land uses, requiring that they be planned and developed to avoid and minimize risk to public health and safety, and to include new requirements related to land use compatibility studies. Lauren will now speak to the proposed transportation topic area changes.
Thanks, Delia. The definition of active transportation now recognizes additional transportation modes, including the use of mobility aids such as motorized wheelchairs and other power-assisted devices. This update reflects the definition used in the provincial policy statement. Policy updates prioritize active transportation in complete street design and direct the city to work with other municipalities to ensure a seamless integration of active transportation networks across municipal jurisdictions. The provincial policy framework makes a more clear connection between active transportation and public health with a complete streets approach for the safety of all users, supporting placemaking opportunities in communities and allowances for other emerging design trends to enhance the existing network of pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. The city's proposed policy updates reflect this approach. Policy updates also include references to a public transportation network that adapts to a changing climate and reduces greenhouse gas emissions with multi-use paths, trails, and bicycle lanes. And finally, policy updates also include prioritizing transit planning and investment to support priority transit corridors and connections to the city's employment areas.
Cultural heritage policy updates reference current legislation, regulations, and local documents, such as the city's archaeological management plan. In terms of cultural heritage resources, we are proposing the removal of criteria for the evaluation of cultural heritage resources, as they are included in provincial regulations. However, we have introduced a policy that allows the city to establish guidelines to further refine the criteria established by the province. We have proposed the inclusion of the City of Hamilton land acknowledgement at the beginning of the Urban Hamilton official plan to acknowledge the first occupants of this land and to recognize that the city must understand the importance of stewarding this land for future generations. The city and Indigenous communities have shared interest in land use planning matters and stewardship, so greater emphasis has been added with respect to engagement with Indigenous communities regarding cultural heritage and archaeological resources. Also included in the policy updates is the acknowledgement of the spiritual aspect of cultural heritage landscapes. The provincial policy statement definitions of built heritage resource and cultural heritage landscape now specify that an Indigenous community may identify the significance of a heritage resource. At this time, we would like to answer any questions that you may have about the provincial plans, housing, employment, transportation, or cultural heritage topic updates.
Thanks, Delia and Lauren. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but I have one. How will the city ensure housing targets are being met?
I can answer that quickly, and maybe Heather, if Heather is on the call, she might want to jump in too if I've missed anything. But we have been directed by council that we will be providing annual updates on the housing targets and to be sure that we are meeting the required supply of units that are required for the population growth that are anticipated to 2051. So we will be having, so we will be doing that on an annual basis, reporting back.
Will that also include how affordable housing targets are being met and not just the market rate ones? Will it be broken down like that?
If Heather's on the call, maybe you could jump in on this and to see if, I think that has been part of the discussion, but maybe you could confirm on that, Heather.
Sure, thanks, Lauren. Yes, it does. The The annual report back will include reporting on a variety of topics, including number of units overall, units by type, affordability, intensification rates and density numbers, as well as monitoring on employment land supply. So it'll be fairly comprehensive.
Sounds like it will be time consuming. You'll finish it 1 year and have to start again right away. I have one other question for you folks. How will the city address the challenge of increasing employment densities within its business parks and industrial lands to achieve the provincial employment forecasts?
I can answer that one. The city needs to preserve the existing supply of employment lands through limiting the number of employment land conversions. So reporting also on annual monitoring of those employment densities and employment land absorption, and to work with a consultant to prepare a strategy to intensify employment areas.
That's interesting. I'm sure Tiffany Singh has some thoughts on that with the Bayfront strategy as well. There's another question from Margaret in the chat. Does the proposed PPS provide any specific guidelines for Indigenous engagement, specifically in relation to cultural resources? And even more specifically, are there any resource funding discussions going on in relation to Indigenous engagement by the province? I'm not sure if you'll be equipped to answer that one.
Well, as it turns out, the province has developed a list of Indigenous communities on a watershed basis that they intend, the province intends, to circulate when the city provides our official plan amendment that's been adopted by council for ministerial approval. So based on that list, staff have been contacting our regular contacts who are local to Hamilton area, but then also wide ranging and spreading as far north as Sauble Beach and as far west as Sarnia and even down into the Windsor area and to Rice Lake. So we've been reaching out. We started with an invitation or an acknowledgement that we're beginning the process back in the fall, and then with most recent engagement processes that we've done, we've provided them again with the details about what the policies are for a second time, I should say, because we did that in the fall. But yeah, and so we have met with one Indigenous community already. We're going to meet this afternoon and again tomorrow with another community, and then a local organization council that represents Indigenous communities within the city. So this,
I think the question was, it sounds like there isn't a standardized process. It sounds like what you're doing is very thorough. Margaret raised her hand to ask a question of clarification, I think. Go ahead, Margaret.
Thanks. Yeah, so we are dealing with this through the EA process ourselves, and I guess the question is, if the province has guidelines, are they proposing to transfer any funding for municipalities from, as in light of the fact that Indigenous nations don't always have resources available for providing comments, for monitoring field work? Do you hear it from your end on your discussions?
We have received one comment from an Indigenous community asking if there was any funding available for them to be able to review our proposed updates. And I had to respond, unfortunately, we don't have any funding for that. I'm not sure whether the province is considering that in future, but as far as we understand at this point, we don't have any.
So, sorry, so further on that, you might wish to know that when we are engaging with the 5 nations, so 3 and then 2 more within the 6 nations that apply to our area with an EA sort of framework, we have a corporate established policy for providing funding for field work monitoring for archaeology and also report reviews. So I'm just wondering if you could apply that because it's a corporate policy, if you could apply that for OPA reviews as well.
Yes. So when we've been circulating these comments or these updates, there isn't a whole lot of detail in the archaeological updates. So there isn't the need to go out to do field work in that respect. And so when we have reached out to First Nation or Indigenous communities, they have, you know, in some cases it's not related to archaeological or they're archaeological experts. So we have been dealing mainly with just the consultation staff members, if they have any.
No, I think I understand. You may need to take the archaeology and expand it into the other areas. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have,
Thanks.
yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, there's a couple other questions. How was the climate change lens applied in this process or on individual topic areas? I'm not sure if you want to save that till the end or if it's appropriate now.
I think we are going to talk about the review
Okay,
that was done
we'll
for
park
climate.
that one.
So yeah, we'll put that one in the next section if you don't mind.
And then, oh, here's a comment from Alyssa Golden. Our Indigenous archaeological monitoring policy and direction to provide capacity funding for monitoring city-initiated archaeology work is based on archaeological specific policy and case law for providing capacity. I think this consultation is a different framework. So that might help address your, or help answer. Maybe we can take that one offline for further discussion. And one last one before we'll keep going with the presentation. Do you feel that the new community benefit charges will affect proposed projects to encourage or discourage more dense housing projects?
I think, Heather, if you're able to speak to that, coming from the Grids 2 perspective, we appreciate it.
Sure, thanks, Gail. I'll take a crack at it. The community benefit charge file is currently in process, so we haven't seen the final version of it yet. So I can't really say right now whether or not it will have an impact on, particularly in relation to what was being asked in the chat, dense housing projects, because I'm not sure it's been determined yet where those the funds from the CBC bylaw will be applied. So there are, part of the ongoing work in the implementation of that council decision is to look at other incentives or other methods that we can use to encourage intensification overall, including various forms of density in housing projects. I think we'll be looking at that a little bit more closely through phase 4 when we're looking at the inclusionary zoning tool as one example of a tool. And then by then the CBC bylaw will have been completed. We'll know potential impacts from that tool. And that we are having our consultant do some additional work for us on essentially an intensification strategy, which will also help us look at other tools and policies and incentives that we can use to really try to achieve these high rates of intensification.
That's great. Thanks, Heather. Maybe I'll squeeze one more in because I think it's relevant. Has there been any discussions as to how increases in remote working may impact job density targets?
I can start with this one. I might also ask Heather to jump in on this one as well, because she's been the one who's been consulting with our land needs, doing the land needs assessment and our consultant. So I believe that the early LNA work, because this is kind of being done during COVID as well, it did review trends in terms of work, and it does include people working from home in the calculation as well. I guess one thing to talk about when it comes to employment densities is that employment areas are, they're not the areas where you'd see like major office development. So you think about people who can work from home, and they're the people who can take a computer with them here and there, but they're not the people, creating physical product, and having to be in more of that employment area environment, like a warehousing or logistics or something like that. So in terms of the employment area densities, yes, there are some jobs that may be able to be remote, but I think when we're talking about that sort of thing, it really is more of a focus on, those type of jobs in maybe our downtown area, things like that. So, but Heather, is there anything you would want to add on about how work from home was reviewed through the LNA?
No, I think you covered it, Lauren. It was taken into account, as you said. That is a key piece of that annual monitoring that we'll be doing going forward, is looking at employment density rates, and that will include looking at potential outcomes or long-lasting implications from remote work versus on-site work in all different aspects of employment land. So it's a good question, and it was included, but there's still a lot of uncertainty, I think, going forward about what the long-term impacts from COVID and remote working will be.
Sounds like that employment survey that planning does is going to be really important. Okay, let's keep going with the presentation then.
Okay, let's move now on to the remaining topic areas, which include climate-related, infrastructure, growth management, firm urban boundary, and urban structure topic areas. We will also highlight the proposed zoning bylaw amendments to the zoning bylaws for the former communities to apply to lands outside of secondary plan areas. These topic areas have been grouped together again because some of the updates relate directly to Council's decision for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario.
So at a high level, policy updates within the climate-related topic area include the following. Preparing for the impacts of a changing climate, including the addition of the term impacts of a changing climate to the glossary, consistent with the definition of the provincial policy statement. New policy speaking to the assessment of infrastructure risks and vulnerabilities arising from the impacts of extreme weather, and monitoring and analysis of stormwater management to incorporate appropriate actions related to green infrastructure and low impact development. The support of energy efficiency techniques for municipally owned facilities by complying with the corporate energy and sustainability policy. And the encouraged use of low-impact development techniques and green infrastructure through urban design, such as rainwater harvesting, rain gardens and bioswales, permeable pavers, and green roofs. Reference to the development of the city's climate change adaptation plan is included in the updates, as well as updated targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The emissions targets are expected to be updated further once Council endorses the community energy and emissions plan anticipated for later this year.
Policy updates under the infrastructure topic area complement those under the climate-related topic area through the introduction of a new section regarding green infrastructure, such as green roofs, low-impact development techniques, and green spaces to reduce the impacts of a changing climate. Reference is also made to the preparation and update of an urban forest strategy, which is currently in process. Other updates include optimizing existing infrastructure and community services facilities, as well as promoting the adaptive reuse of existing infrastructure and community services facilities, endeavoring to recover the full life cycle cost of providing sustainable public community services facilities as required by applicable bylaws and provincial legislation. Updated requirements related to the city's water, wastewater, and stormwater master plans are also included, such as ensuring that the city's water and wastewater systems are prepared for the impacts of a changing climate, and that stormwater management systems incorporate low-impact development techniques and green infrastructure. Finally, there is an existing policy within the official plan that the city may allow existing lots and existing uses that front onto a rural-urban boundary road to connect to existing municipal water and wastewater systems subject to conditions. However, recent updates to the Niagara Escarpment Plan prohibits extensions to lands within the Escarpment Natural, Escarpment Protection, and Escarpment Rural designations. Therefore, an update is required to the official plan to ensure its conformity with the Niagara Escarpment Plan.
So under the growth management topic area, the policy updates include reference to our Future Hamilton, which is the city's 25-year community plan that reflects the values and aspirations of Hamiltonians, as well as reference to Grids 2, including updating the strategic directions and the city's growth strategy to accommodate population and employment growth to the year 2051. Proposed updates also include revised growth plan population employment growth targets. The growth plan projections include an increase of 236,000 people and 110,000 households and 119,000 additional jobs by the year 2051. Residential intensification targets have been adjusted. The city's overall residential intensification target has increased from 40% to 80%, and the city will review and update its zoning bylaw to facilitate the additional 27,000 housing units needed to be developed through the intensification within the neighborhoods designation. More details on how this will be achieved will be provided in the urban structure and zoning and bylaw amendments topic area in this session. Finally, density targets are proposed to be increased from 250 to 500 people and jobs per hectare within the downtown urban growth center, and from 50 to 60 people and jobs per hectare within the greenfield area by the year 2051. Also under the growth management topic area, policies affirming that the city will accommodate all new housing units, almost 110,000 units, within the existing urban area, including both the built-up and greenfield areas. The final highlight for this topic area is the addition of policies affirming that only at the time of the municipal comprehensive review will any possible adjustments be made to the urban boundary, provided there is no net increase in land area. So if all the growth is to occur within the existing urban area, amendments to the rural Hamilton official plan are necessary. And these updates include policy reference to a firm urban boundary, the inclusion of a policy that specialty crop and rural lands may not be redesignated for non-agricultural purposes, which is similar to one that is already in place prohibiting conversion of agriculturally designated land. And the deletion of Special Policy Area B, which was the future urban growth node known as Elfrida.
Policy updates under the urban structure topic area include the introduction of policies describing major transit station areas, or MTSAs, as strategic growth areas, including the delineation of MTSAs through a future amendment. That's phase 4 of the OP review. The proposed updates for this phase, for this current phase, include a new policy identifying that planned densities for MTSAs on the priority transit corridor, the B line, shall be planned to be a minimum of 160 residents and jobs combined per hectare, or a lower target as approved by the province, which will be identified through a future amendment to this plan in phase 4. MTSAs along the priority transit corridor, as well as those that are not located on the priority transit corridor, shall be planned to achieve intensification and a greater density of mixed uses to support higher order transit. Another policy is proposed to be added stating that intensification, redevelopment, and compact form will be encouraged generally through the urban area, in accordance with appropriate development standards. Increased maximum heights for medium and high density residential uses of 11 stories and 30 stories respectively, without an amendment to the plan, are also included in the proposed amendments. Also, updates include the addition of fourplexes and multiple dwellings up to a maximum of 6 dwelling units within low density residential areas without the need for an official plan amendment, and updates to the residential density range policies within the neighborhoods designation are to be used as a measure for the purpose of measuring and preparing policies for secondary plans and for master plan planning purposes only, and not to be applied on a site-by-site basis. This policy change is intended to increase flexibility and facilitate development approvals without the need for official plan amendments related to density only. Additional policies to ensure compatibility with adjacent uses have also been added. The following list highlights the policy updates related to Council's decision for a no urban boundary expansion growth scenario. Focusing on the Urban Hamilton official plan, increased intensification and density targets are referenced. Urban boundary expansion policies have been removed, and the addition of a policy prohibiting urban boundary expansions in advance of the next MCR has been added, and amendments to the neighborhoods designation to permit a broader range of uses in low density residential areas and added flexibility to residential density categories. In order to implement the official plan policy updates to support all projected population and employment growth within the existing urban area, amendments to the zoning bylaws of the former communities are necessary. At this point, I would like to turn the presentation over to Alana Fulford, Senior Planner within the Zoning Reform Team, to highlight the proposed updates to the zoning bylaws for the former communities.
Thanks, Delia. So the zoning, as everyone is likely familiar, zoning bylaw 05200 is the city's comprehensive zoning bylaw, which applies citywide. However, with respect to the residential zones, the 6 zoning bylaws of the former communities still apply. So Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough, Glanbrook, the former city of Hamilton, and Stony Creek. In order to implement Council's growth management strategy, which has informed the proposed policy changes to the Urban Hamilton Official Plan, as has been discussed so far, modifications are proposed to the zoning bylaws of the former communities. Small-scale intensification opportunities are proposed for the city's low-density areas to implement Council's approval of a no urban boundary expansion growth option and the resulting draft policy changes to the UHOP. The low-density areas are basically those neighborhoods across the city which are predominantly made up of single detached dwellings. Providing more opportunities for intensification in these low-density areas may be achieved by allowing a broader range of housing type in these areas. So in addition to single detached dwellings, that would be permitting semi-detached dwellings, duplex dwellings, triplexes and fourplexes, and street townhouses. Now, at this time, what is being proposed through the zoning bylaw amendment is permitting triplexes and fourplexes through conversions only. So adding units within an existing dwelling. Between all the 6 former community zoning bylaws, there are a lot of existing low density zones. There's over 40. So a fair number of these existing low density residential zones only permit single detached dwellings. So this broader range of housing types would be permitted in these zones. Now, the changes that are proposed are an interim step, and they're intended to provide opportunities for small-scale intensification to implement this direction of council. A mix of housing types in neighborhoods provides the small-scale intensification opportunity and housing choices for residents. I did want to take a moment to talk briefly about the proposed changes in the context of the city's residential zoning project. And one thing that we wanted to make clear as we've consulted with the public and other stakeholders is that these amendments to the zoning bylaws are really intended as an interim step. Staff are in the midst of the residential zoning project, which is a comprehensive zoning exercise to introduce new residential zones to zoning bylaw 05200, thereby replacing the existing residential zones of the former community zoning bylaws. The project is divided into phases, with the low density zones, which as has been indicated, make up the bulk of the residential zones and the residential lands in the city. That represents the first phase of the project, and that's what we're actively working on right now. The subsequent phases will introduce medium and high density zones to 05200. So by introducing new low density residential zones to 05200, there will be one set of residential zones citywide with a common set of zoning regulations instead of the over 40 residential zones that presently exist. So with Council's approval of the no urban boundary expansion growth option, the changes that are presented today, so to expand the housing types permitted in these low density areas, is an interim step to implement Council's direction. And it's interim in that, as indicated, these changes are proposed to the low density residential zones of former community bylaws that will ultimately be replaced by the new zones that are introduced into 05200. It's also interim in that it really is intended to inform the residential zoning project going forward. So as we continue to work on evaluating and recommending new zones and zoning regulations across the city, this can inform that process. And it's really through that project and through that phase 1 of the project that we are, looking to address important matters like parking standards and, anything that may come from, the climate change and related policy direction. So matters like that are ultimately going to be addressed through the residential zoning project. Just to note that, so going forward, the next kind of set of, deliverables would be, the completion of phase 1. At that point is when we will have the draft low density residential zones, and that's when we'll then sort of kick off the consultation with the public on those draft zones. So at this time, we'd like to answer any questions that anyone may have about the topics that we just covered. So climate-related, infrastructure, growth management, firm urban boundary or urban structure topic areas, and then the zoning bylaw proposed changes that I've just reviewed.
Thank you. I have one question before I get into what's in the chat. What are you guys going to do if the province doesn't approve the no urban boundary expansion?
Is that, Jennifer, it's Shannon, is that as it relates to the zoning bylaw?
I think generally for both the OP and the zoning.
I'll maybe let Lauren and Delia tackle the official plan amendment, but the zoning couldn't come in force and effect until those policies were approved.
Thanks, Shannon.
So,
Right.
so if for instance, if the province doesn't approve the city's like the council directed like no urban boundary expansion growth scenario, so they would have to, council would have to go and consider other scenarios like the ambitious density growth scenario that was presented by the city. And we would likely, we would take another look at the policies that we've put in place that were really meant to implement the no urban boundary expansion. But I'm not sure if we would pull back on any of those policies necessarily, maybe looking at height, maybe, but I'm not, I mean, that's a scenario that we look at if we got there, but I don't think, yeah, what we've put out there right now, I can't think of ones that we'd necessarily pull back on, because I think recognizing we do, even under the ambitious density scenario that had been brought forward to council, there was, it was called ambitious for that reason, that even in that scenario, the amount of intensification that was needed was still quite high, considering the city's previous rates of intensification just historically leading up to that point. So, you know, we have to do more anyway. So would we pull back on any of the things we proposed through this? I don't know. But we'll have to just see what the province says and then go from there.
Thanks. Okay. First question in the chat. Are there any plans for supporting work to help implement green infrastructure goals? So like green building standards. And if there are, how and when is that expected to be implemented?
I can take a stab at that answer. So the Community Energy and Emissions Plan is something that is a project by one of my colleagues in Sustainable Communities section, and staff have been engaging with the public on a draft plan. The Sustainable Building and Development Standards have been considered, and draft has been prepared, but that would come alongside with the Community Energy and Emissions Plan. And in terms of timing, that plan, as I understand it, would come later this year, perhaps. So those that other project could dovetail into that CEEP project deliverable.
Okay, great. Sounds like hopefully soon. Next question. Do these changes, so I think this is related to the zoning, permit laneway, backyard, granny flat homes? Alana, this is an easy one for you, I think.
Hopefully, yes. There, last year, there were introductions to, sorry, let's start this again. Secondary dwelling units were introduced across the city. So permissions to either add a internal dwelling unit to a home or to have a detached secondary dwelling unit, and that's permitted in a rear or an interior side yard. So those permissions are in place now. The proposal, additional dwelling types that are being proposed would sort of, in the context of like a conversion, would sort of build on that. So whereas now you're permitted one additional dwelling unit through a secondary dwelling unit, it would be basically allowing additional units, you know, up to 4 through a conversion. That's sort of how that would align with the existing permissions that have been established for SDUs.
Great, thank you. Now this is one, the next question I think about sometimes. Have any considerations been made to ensure compatibility / sympathetic small-scale intensification in established historical neighborhoods, and to allow for appropriate consideration for demo and rebuild of properties where there's a heritage interest?
I can start by certainly acknowledging that that is an important consideration as we go forward, you know, with this direction of council, and knowing sort of what that might look like in terms of you know, establishing and promoting this small scale intensification. So it's certainly an important consideration from the perspective of specific heritage interest. Shannon, can you possibly kind of build on and add to that component?
I think she's
Okay, she
muted.
might have stepped out. I mean, there's that is not my area of expertise per se, but certainly as part of that exercise, those would be important considerations. There are processes in place, obviously, to identify and to you know, ensure that there's some protection measures there. So I would think that, you know, what is going to be proposed in terms of the built form specifically has to be integrated with, you know, those established processes to promote and protect heritage. So it is certainly an interesting dynamic going forward that, you know, that has to be balanced between sort of promoting this small scale intensification, but also recognizing, you know, the characteristics and the character of these neighborhoods. So it's certainly a challenge, to say the least.
Yeah, we heard this week, Melanie Pham and I have been doing family-friendly housing consultation for that strategy, and we've heard similar comments. And there was a suggestion for some form of intensification or infill guidelines. So who knows where that'll go? Another question, what is the general timing for phase 1 of the residential zoning?
That one, that is a tough one to respond to. There's a lot of moving parts and uncertainty with respect to the, you know, what might come out of this process. Obviously, we also have, you know, we have to hear from the province. We have some election considerations to that affect timing as well. I really can't identify a specific timeline, but just indicate that, you know, we are, as we move forward with this interim bylaw amendment, we are still actively working on the other component. It is really hard to say when we might be going out to the public with those draft zones. So unfortunately, I'm really not in a position to kind of set a target date for that at this time.
I think that's totally reasonable. It's a big project. Okay, I'll move over, and I think this one will be for Delia or Lauren. Is there a plan to establish transit supportive development to be within walking distance of existing and planned transit stations as hubs for active transportation and higher density uses are developed? So I think it's asking about, are you locating more density along transit corridors?
Yeah, so in phase 4, we're looking at the major transit station area delineations and the densities that would be surrounding each one of the transit station areas along the LRT route. So that is coming in a later phase 4. So I think that's in 2023, late 2023, we're looking at that. Yeah, and so I hope that answers the question in terms of that, if that was the intent. I think there was
Sounds
also
like
discussion about active transportation as well
Mhm.
in that, and I think through that review of the MTSA work, we're going to, ensure that we're considering active transportation at that point as well, and connectivity through pedestrian cycling network as well.
That's great. Just being mindful of time, I think we've got a couple more questions we can get to. So you had mentioned that there's a report back for housing, but is there a same report back for monitoring on the green ventures? So like LID, green roofs, bioswales, how they're maintained, are they functioning well, what could be improved, that sort of report back?
I was looking at the infrastructure topic area updates. That you can see copies of the track changes version of these proposed updates on the OP review webpage, which we'll share with you later in the presentation. But there is reference to annual reporting for water and wastewater. And so in that sense, yeah, that where there is a stormwater management plan in place, that the reporting should be done annually, and then maintenance of the plan. So I think in that respect, there are, I guess, other subdivision agreements and things that govern drainage and grading. But yes, I can appreciate that there are some times that the final landowner may not be aware or respectful of those. So I think that's probably something that we have to look at at a more local level.
And I'll add on to that, Delia, that in the updates to Chapter C of the UHOP, there is a new policy that's speaking to the city maintaining and updating a stormwater master plan. And so one of the sub policies in that is that would include, so it does speak to green infrastructure in that policy, and it also speaks to the final point being that we include an implementation and maintenance plan. So it's getting into that idea of maintaining that infrastructure. And I'm assuming that kind of review of the effectiveness and if we have to go back and do, if it's city infrastructure or city-owned lands, we'd have to go back and do some maintenance if there was issues with the effectiveness of certain green infrastructure like bioswales and things like that, if they're not performing effectively.
Okay, great. I want to squeeze in one last question. Is it anticipated that site plan control would be required for those 4 to 6 unit small scale intensification that would be done through the zoning conversions? Alana?
Yeah, I can't provide a definitive answer on that, but I'm thinking for sort of the more ground related individual, individual site by site, that kind of small scale, that likely not, but that is certainly something for further discussion.
That's interesting because we require it now, and I think it'd be the bane of everybody's existence, or it is currently the bane of everybody's existence. So it would help streamline the process, I'm sure. But then there'd be all those unintended consequences of garbage being in unsightly areas and no parking in the right spots. Anyways, I'll hand it back to you guys to finish off. Thank you so much.
Okay, so let's take a few moments for concluding remarks and next steps. So we're currently in the early consultation phase for the draft official plan amendments. And in February, we held 2 virtual open houses with the public and a stakeholder session that included representatives from the building industry, developers, conservation authorities, and environmental groups. Right now, we're in the process of reaching out to individual Indigenous communities, including our regular contacts, as well as those recommended by the ministry based on their watershed approach. So statutory engagement is the engagement that is required by the Planning Act, whereas non-statutory engagement is the additional consultation with the community for the benefit of finalizing the OP amendments. Once the province's 90-day review period of the draft official plan amendment has ended, the city will host a statutory open house and statutory public meeting as per the Planning Act requirements, including newspaper notices. This slide indicates the next steps and where we are within the work plan for the first phase of the official plan review. We've had as I noted, we have done 2 non-statutory public open houses, virtual open houses in late February, and we had a public survey posted on Engage Hamilton, which ended on March 8th. And then again, once the 90-day review period has ended, the province's 90-day review period has ended, the city will provide notice of a statutory open house and statutory public meeting held in early and mid-May respectively. And then following the council adoption of the official plan amendments in late May, early June, we'll then forward a copy of the final official plan amendments to the province for their approval. And this work plan ensures the city meets the province's July 1st deadline for the conformity amendments.
Okay, so if you'd like to learn more about the official plan review project, updates to the current MCR component, as well as topic areas to be considered in future phases, we would like to encourage you to visit the official plan review webpage. This is also where you will be able to access track changes versions of the proposed updates to the official plans for all topic areas. Also, you can check out the Grids 2 Municipal Comprehensive Review webpage to learn more about the steps involved in developing and completing the city strategy for accommodating future population and employment growth. We have also referenced links to the city's current urban and rural Hamilton official plans, where you can access current official plan policies and mapping. The Grids 2 MCR project page on Engage Hamilton will be updated with questions and answers from the open houses and stakeholder session, as well as a consultation summary report that will be posted at a future date. So if you have any other questions or concerns, please contact staff at the Grids 2 MCR at hamilton.ca email address.
Great. All right. So in closing, I'd like to thank Delia and Lauren and Alana for a great presentation. Also, I want to take this opportunity to put out a special thanks to Jennifer Roth, because as many of you know, she will be leaving PED to go to Healthy and Safe Communities. So of course, she's going to be greatly missed. Also, thanks to Marie Auk and the entire Employee Engagement Committee for all of your work. And of course, without all of you, these events wouldn't be possible. So thanks for sharing your lunch hour with us. Watch your inbox for details of our next Lunch and Learn featuring the environmental assessment process, which will take place on April 21st. As always, you'll also receive a link to the presentation as well as the slides and video. So thanks, and everybody have a great afternoon. Take care.